At the end of Chapter 3, Malatesta wrote about solidarity and how it's a fundamental characteristic in human beings. Chapter 4 expands on that with a quote by Mikhail Bakunin, "My freedom is the freedom of all." Let's see what he meant by that. My name is Sean, and welcome to Germinal. Individuals aren't independent. They are strongly influenced by each other. We could even say that you are a product of your environment. If your neighbor is in chains, you will greatly be affected by that. Your existence, Bakunin argues, will be determined by their slavery. I who want to be free cannot be because all the men around me do not yet want to be free, and consequently, they become tools of oppression against me. And by that logic, even if you only care about your self-interest, you will strive towards solidarity. Your own interest and the interest of society are one. But this solidarity and this cooperation can be used perversely. Cooperation isn't always consensual. You can create something very similar to cooperation by forcing people to work for you. Take for example a fast food production chain where all workers cooperate, not because it's better for them to do so, but because they're forced to. It's more productive. They do it for the boss's profit, and if they don't, they won't receive a wage and they won't be able to feed themselves. In this case, the fruits of cooperation don't go to the parties agreeing to it, but to the person forcing this cooperation. This is a fundamental contradiction in humankind. We are very cooperative, yet we divide ourselves into different individuals, different nationalities, different races, and different genders. This contradiction is very apparent in a capitalist system. We cooperate together to mass produce, but we're also in competition with one another. The principle of each for himself, which is the war of all against all, arose in the course of history to complicate, to sidetrack, and paralyze the war of all against nature for the greatest well-being of mankind, which can be completely successful only by being based on the principle of all for one and one for all. Malatesta sees this tendency to divide and dominate as animalistic and contrary to our human instincts. The principle of each for him or herself, as we have seen earlier, can't guarantee an individual's well-being. The fight against nature has to be fought collectively. Mankind has suffered great harm as a result of this intrusion of domination and exploitation in the midst of human association. But in spite of the terrible oppression to which the masses have been subjected, in spite of poverty, in spite of vice, crime, and the degradation which poverty and slavery produce in the slaves and in the masters, in spite of accumulated antagonism, of wars of extermination, in spite of artificially created conflicting interests, the social instinct has survived and developed. This is how strong our instinct for cooperation is. We could even say that because of these hardships, we are able to connect and understand each other when suffering. On top of that, Malatesta says in 1891 that travel, communication, science, literature, production have all developed so much that all of humanity is even more linked than before. Imagine what he would say now. Now, more than ever, the growth and development of individuals across the world contribute to our own development and well-being. And to go back to Bakunin when he said, "My freedom is the freedom of all," our well-being hinges upon all circumstances acting on all human beings because all human beings are in some way connected. Malatesta explains how someone living in the Apennines isn't only strongly affected by the conditions of the Italian people, but also on workers' conditions in America or Australia, on the discovery made by a Swedish scientist, on the state of mind and material conditions of the Chinese, on there being war or peace in Africa. In other words, on all the circumstances, large and small, which anywhere in the world are acting on a human being. This vast solidarity is mostly unconscious. People don't consciously calculate how helping others actually benefit them. It's spontaneous, and Malatesta says that this is evidence to show how solidarity is a human instinct. It's a natural law amongst men, and it survives even a system which combats it. Now, Malatesta goes on to show how this basic principle of "I do better if people around me do better" should lead to the abolition of private property. Of course, the liberation of every worker around the world is extremely beneficial for every worker. but it would also be beneficial for the former wealthy class because they too are connected to workers, and by giving up their exploitative attitude, they will create a better and safer environment for their own growth. Now, with the abolition of private property, people will stop working for others and put their labor not in the interest of a few, but in their own interest, the interest of humankind. And if we traded domination and economic privilege for human solidarity by abolishing property, why would we need a government? Once private property has been abolished, government, which is its defender, must disappear. If it were to survive, it would tend always to re-establish a privileged and oppressing class in one guise or another. We are used to a minority imposing and directing cooperation for their own interest, but here, cooperation would be free, voluntary, and directed to everybody's interests, and therefore it would become that much more widespread and effective. Once individuals understand that their interest resides in the interests of all, will possibly unlock inconceivable potential for the human race. Our methods of cooperation, our sociability, will develop as we grow collectively. We will finally organize in order to achieve the greatest well-being and the greatest freedom for all. People will see their neighbors as comrades with whom they fight against natural forces. They won't try to accumulate the most comfort for themselves, but for everybody, because they'll understand that if everybody is comfortable, the environment that determines us will be much more fertile and will make us grow tenfold. This society of free people, this society of friends, is anarchy.